Evan had never been inside a place like the Community Music Academy before. The tall glass doors, the wide hallways, and the soft echoes of instruments being practiced behind closed rooms all made him feel like he had stepped into another world. He moved slowly, almost afraid to touch anything, worried that even his footsteps might seem out of place. People rushed past him with sheet music in their hands, some chatting loudly about upcoming auditions, while others hummed melodies under their breath, as if music was as natural to them as breathing. Evan kept his eyes low, hoping not to draw attention. He clutched the small slip of paper that held his audition time last on the list. The woman at the front desk had seemed surprised when she saw his name, almost double-checking to make sure he was actually signed up. She smiled politely, but he could feel her curiosity. It was the same look he had seen many times before, the look that asked, "Who is this boy, and why is he here?" He pushed open the door to the waiting room, where a group of students sat with their families. Some were practicing finger positions in the air. Others tapped rhythms on their knees. And many seemed completely confident, laughing as if they had done this 1,000 times. When Evan walked in, a few glanced up. Their eyes scanned him briefly, his worn shoes, his faded jacket, the nervous way he held the paper, and then just as quickly, they turned back to their conversations. He took a seat in the corner. His hands were cold, and he rubbed them together, trying to warm them. On the wall, a digital clock counted the minutes. Each number that changed made his stomach twist. He could hear faint bits of music leaking from the audition hall, the rise of a piano, the fall of a violin, someone singing in a soft, wavering voice. Every sound reminded him of how out of place he felt. Evan wasn't like the others. He didn't grow up in music schools or take lessons with well-known teachers. He hadn't performed in concerts or competitions. Everything he knew, he learned alone, on a broken piano that someone had thrown away. He found it near an apartment dumpster when he was 12. The wood was cracked, the pedals stuck, and several keys didn't play at all. But it was still a piano, and to Evan, that was enough. Even now, years later, he remembered how he dragged it home, piece by piece with the help of a neighbor. The soundboard had been heavy, the legs scratched and unstable, but once he assembled it, he spent hours sitting in front of it, touching the keys as if they were treasure. He never forgot the smell of old wood, the dust rising when he tried his first simple chord, or the feeling of wonder when he realized he could make music even if it wasn't perfect. Now, sitting in the academy, surrounded by polished instruments and confident students, the memory seemed far away. Here, everything looked clean, modern, and full of talent. People belonged here. He wasn't sure he did. A loud laugh came from the other side of the room. A group of students were joking around, probably about something harmless, but it made Evan shrink a little. He wondered if they would laugh that way about him once they saw him play. He could already imagine the whispers asterisk. He didn't go to school for music. He probably doesn't even know proper technique. Why is he even auditioning? He had heard those kinds of comments before. He tried to shake the thought away. He had worked hard to get here. He practiced every day, teaching himself from online videos, old music books from the library, and watching performers who inspired him. He wasn't some lost beginner. He knew what he could do, even if no one else believed it yet. The door opened, and a girl stepped out with tears in her eyes. Her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders and whispered something comforting. Evan felt a sting of fear. Was the audition that difficult? Did the director reject people openly? Did he criticize them in front of everyone? He swallowed hard. Another student was called in, and Evan watched as the boy stood up confidently, rolled his shoulders back, and walked as if he owned the room. People like him always made Evan nervous. They looked so sure, so completely certain that they belonged in front of an audience. Evan wished he could borrow just a little of that confidence. Minutes passed slowly. One by one, students went in and came out, some smiling, some disappointed, some completely unreadable. The sunlight from the windows shifted across the floor as the afternoon grew later. Evan tried to distract himself by studying the posters on the wall, photos of past performances, students smiling on stage, the director shaking hands with winners of competitions. The director's name, Mr. Carver, was on all of them. Evan had heard people talking about him earlier in the hallway. Some said he was strict. Others said he was brilliant, but hard to impress. A few students whispered that he had been in a bad mood all week. Evan wished he hadn't heard that. Finally, a staff member stepped into the waiting room and called the next name. Then the next. And then the next. Each one brought Evan closer to the end of the list. His chest felt tight, and his leg bounced nervously. He tried to calm himself by breathing slowly, something he read online that was supposed to help before a performance. It didn't seem to help much. At last, only one name remained on the paper in his hand, his own. The staff member reappeared and glanced at the list. "You're the last one, right?" she asked. Evan nodded. "All right," she said with a kind smile. "They're ready for you." He stood up slowly. His knees felt unsteady. The hallway outside the audition room seemed longer now, like it stretched forever. As he walked, he could hear faint echoes of students packing up their things behind classroom doors. The building felt quieter, emptier, as if it were watching him. He reached the audition door and took a deep breath before pushing it open. Inside, the room was large but not crowded. The lights were bright, shining off the polished surface of the black grand piano in the center. Chairs were stacked neatly against the walls. In front of the piano, a long table stood where Mr. Carver sat, flipping through a stack of papers. He didn't look up right away. 2 other staff members were in the room, taking notes and organizing schedules. Evan stepped forward, holding his slip of paper out nervously. "Name?" Mr. Carver asked without lifting his gaze. "Evan, sir," he replied softly. The director finally glanced up. He studied Evan for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked back at the list and raised an eyebrow. "You're the final audition today," he said, sounding tired. "Long day. Let's hope you can end it on a good note." He probably meant it as a simple comment, but the words hit Evan like a weight. He felt pressure tighten around his chest. What if he disappointed him? What if this was a mistake? "You may begin when you're ready," Mr. Carver said. Evan nodded and walked toward the piano. The room seemed too quiet. Every step he took felt loud. He could sense the eyes on him, measuring him, waiting to see whether he would succeed or fail. He reached the bench and noticed a few students lingering by the door. They must have finished early and stayed behind out of curiosity. He recognized some faces from the waiting room. A couple whispered to each other, and he heard a soft laugh. He wasn't sure if it was about him, but the timing made his stomach twist. He sat down carefully, adjusting the bench. His fingers trembled slightly as he placed them on his lap. Someone near the door murmured something he couldn't make out, followed by another quiet laugh. His ears burned. He lowered his hands onto the keys. The cool surface felt familiar, grounding, almost comforting. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, trying to shut out everything. The whispers, the director's tired expression, the fear of failing. This was why he came. This was his chance. He opened his eyes, took a slow breath, and let his fingers rest lightly over the keys. And in that tense, silent moment, just before he played the first note, the room felt as if it were holding its breath with him. Evan's fingers hovered above the piano keys. But before the sound of the first note ever came, his mind drifted back to a time long before this moment. It wasn't something he planned. It just happened, the way memories sometimes rise when fear presses too hard. He remembered the small apartment where he grew up. The walls were thin enough that he could hear neighbors arguing, televisions buzzing, and footsteps in the hallway. His home had always been a little noisy, a little chaotic, and never quite comfortable. But it was what he knew. His family didn't have much. His mother worked long hours, often coming home tired and carrying the weight of the day on her shoulders. His father wasn't around, and Evan learned early on not to expect things that weren't possible. Music, for example, seemed like something that belonged to people in brighter homes with clean floors and bookshelves filled with thick music books. Not people like him, but even in that small, cluttered apartment, he found tiny moments where sound felt magical. When he was younger, he would tap rhythms on the table while doing homework or hum little tunes while waiting for dinner. It was simple and quiet, but something about making sound always felt right. He didn't think too much about it until the day he found the old piano behind the apartment building. It was leaning against a dumpster, looking abandoned and forgotten. The wood was scratched and one of the legs was broken. A few keys were chipped, and others didn't move at all when pressed. Most people would have ignored it, but not Evan. He walked around it slowly, staring at it the way someone might stare at something precious. He touched the top of it, feeling the rough surface beneath his fingers. When he lifted the fallboard and pressed a key, a dull sound came out, muted and cracked, but still a sound. His heart jumped. A neighbor named Mr. Holt saw him crouched beside the piano. "It's broken," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead as he hauled out a bag of trash. "Someone moved out last week and left it there. Can't even get the thing tuned anymore." But to Evan, it didn't matter if it was broken. It still worked enough for him to dream. He asked Mr. Holt if he could help him move it, and the older man laughed softly, shaking his head at the idea of a kid wanting to bring home something so heavy and beat up. Still, he agreed. They spent an hour dragging the piano across the pavement, little by little. The soundboard scraped against the ground, leaving marks on the concrete, and the legs wobbled dangerously. But Evan didn't care. With every inch they moved it, his excitement grew. By the time they reached the apartment, his arms were sore, sweat dripped down his forehead, and his lungs burned. But when the piano finally stood in the corner of his living room, he felt a happiness he couldn't explain. His mother stared at it when she got home, shocked to see such a large object taking up nearly all the space near the window. "What in the world?" she said, dropping her bag. Evan told her everything, how he found it, how Mr. Holt helped him, how he wanted to learn to play. She shook her head at first, unsure what to make of his excitement, but she didn't tell him to get rid of it. She simply sighed and said, "As long as it doesn't break the floor." From that day on, the piano became a quiet part of their home. He sat at it every chance he got. He started with simple things, pressing random keys, trying to create little patterns of sound, learning what happened when he touched the keyboard lightly versus firmly. Many of the keys didn't play right, but he found ways to build melodies around the broken ones. There was something comforting about those late evenings. Sometimes the sun would dip below the windowsill as the room filled with warm orange light. Other times it would be night, and the small lamp beside the piano cast a soft glow on the worn keys. The apartment might have been noisy, but when Evan played, it felt like the rest of the world faded out for a moment. He didn't have lessons, so he learned in pieces. He borrowed music books from the library, though most were too advanced for him at first. He watched videos online, pausing every few seconds to copy hand positions or practice a measure again and again. His mother would sometimes pass by and listen quietly, smiling even after long work shifts. Not everyone understood. Some neighbors complained about the noise. Others teased him for spending so much time on something that seemed, to them, impossible to accomplish without money or a teacher. But Evan kept going. Each day, even if only for a short time, he practiced. His fingers grew stronger, faster, more confident. He learned how to listen closely, how to tell when a note needed to be softer, slower, brighter. The music became part of him, a place where he felt free. He remembered one particular night when rain tapped against the windows, steady and calming. He sat at the piano, practicing a simple melody he had created that afternoon. The broken keys didn't bother him that night. They had become part of the instrument's character, part of the challenge that shaped him. His mother listened from across the room, eyes half closed with exhaustion. When he finished playing, she whispered, "You make this place feel better." Those words stayed with him. Years passed, and Evan improved slowly but surely. He never had a perfect instrument or expert guidance, but he had passion. He practiced until his fingers hurt, until the sound from the piano became something deeper, something that felt like a language he didn't need to speak out loud. Still, even with all that growth, he never imagined he would audition anywhere. The Music Academy was a place he had only seen online. He watched videos of their students performing on stage, dressed neatly and playing with confident smiles. He admired them from a distance, not thinking he would ever stand where they stood. It was his mother who first suggested he try. One evening she came home holding a flyer she found near the bus stop. It announced auditions for new students at the academy. She handed it to him while reheating leftovers for dinner. "You should go," she said casually. "You've come a long way. You should at least let someone hear you." Evan stared at the flyer for a long time. His stomach twisted with doubt. "I don't know if I'm good enough," he said quietly. "You won't know unless you try," she replied, touching his shoulder. He thought about it for days. He imagined walking into the academy, imagined the looks the other students might give him, imagined the possibility of failing in front of professionals. But he also imagined something else, what it would feel like to play on a real piano, a working one, not missing keys, not out of tune. What it would feel like to see if he truly belonged in a place where music wasn't just a hobby, but a future. Eventually, he signed up. He practiced harder than ever in the weeks that followed. He wrote his own piece, something that reflected his own journey, filled with soft beginnings and stronger endings. Every note meant something to him, every measure built from years of practice and emotion. But the night before the audition, doubt returned. He sat at his piano, staring at the chipped keys that had carried him so far. What if he embarrassed himself? What if his playing wasn't polished enough? What if the people at the academy laughed, the way some neighbors once had? His mother found him sitting there, shoulders slumped. She placed a hand on the piano, as if touching the history carved into its surface. "You've done everything you can," she said softly. "All you have to do now is try." He nodded, though fear still lingered. The next morning, he woke early, packed a bag with his music sheets, and took a long bus ride to the academy. He spent most of the time staying quiet, staring out the window as the city passed by. His hands shook slightly, but he kept reminding himself why he was doing this. He wasn't trying to prove anything to the world. He just wanted a chance. When he finally arrived at the academy, the building seemed even bigger than it looked online. Tall windows reflected the sunlight, and the entrance was filled with students carrying instruments and talking confidently. Evan felt his chest tighten again. He wondered if he had made a mistake, but he forced himself to walk forward. One step, then another. He checked in at the front desk, received the slip with his audition time, and made his way to the waiting room. The moment part one began. Now, back in the present, Evan sat at the piano inside the audition hall. His fingers trembled slightly, but his memory reminded him of why he was here. All the late nights, the broken keys, the encouragement from his mother. The years of practice, it had all led him to this moment. He remembered the way the old piano felt beneath his hands, how it grounded him even when life felt uncertain. The grand piano before him now was so different, smooth, polished, untouched by time, but music was music, and he knew how to find his way through it. The whispering students near the door didn't matter. The tired look on the director's face didn't matter. The fear inside him didn't matter. What mattered was that he was here, finally, and he was ready to show what he carried inside. He took a slow breath, steadying himself, and he prepared to play. Evan's fingers finally settled on the smooth keys of the grand piano. The room was so quiet he could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. For a moment he didn't move. It wasn't because he didn't know what to play. He had practiced this piece 1,000 times. It was because he could feel every pair of eyes in the room waiting for him. Some were curious. Some were doubting. A few, he sensed, were simply ready to be entertained if he messed up. He didn't look at them. He didn't dare. He kept his gaze on the keys, letting the silence stretch for just a moment longer. His heart was beating too fast, loud enough that he felt it in his throat. His hands trembled slightly, and he pressed them lightly onto the keys to steady them. He tried to breathe the way he had taught himself, slow, deep, steady. He whispered inside his mind, "Asterisk, it's just music. You've played this before. Asterisk, but this wasn't the old broken piano in his living room. This wasn't late-nightus when no one was listening. This was real. This mattered." And that made everything harder. Behind him, near the doorway, he heard a muffled laugh. He didn't turn, but he knew it wasn't innocent. It was the kind of laugh people let out when they already decided something about you. Maybe they looked at his worn jacket or his nervous posture and thought he was out of place. Maybe they assumed he didn't belong here. The director, Mr. Carver, shifted in his seat, flipping a page on the clipboard in front of him. His face looked tired, as if this audition was just one more task to check off before he could finally go home. Evan noticed the way the man tapped his pen impatiently, not in a mean way, but in a way that said he had seen too many performances today and wasn't expecting anything new. Evan closed his eyes for a brief moment. He let a single memory rise a night when he sat at his old piano, the room filled with nothing but faint lamplight and the soft sound of rain tapping the window. He had played then without fear, without judging himself, without imagining who might be listening. He played because the music meant something to him. He held on to that memory, letting it warm his chest. Then he opened his eyes. He placed his hands in the starting position, and he began. The first notes were soft. He didn't strike them with force or rush into the melody. He let them float, the way he always did. The sound filled the room in a gentle wave, almost like a whisper, telling everyone to stop and listen. The grand piano responded beautifully. Every key was clear, bright, and rich, so different from what he was used to. It startled him at first, hearing how clean the notes sounded, but he kept going. His fingers moved slowly, carefully, building the opening of the piece with patience. At first, no one reacted. The room stayed still, the director stayed quiet, and the students near the door remained in their little cluster, leaning against the wall. But gradually, something changed. His fingers gained confidence. The melody grew warmer, stronger. The shift was small, but it changed the atmosphere around him. The quiet in the room wasn't boredom anymore. It was curiosity. Evan didn't look up. He didn't need to. He could feel it. He could sense that people were starting to listen. He moved into the second part of the piece, where the melody lifted and opened up like a deep breath. His hands flowed from one end of the keyboard to the other, not perfectly, not flawlessly, but with emotion. Real emotion. The kind he had carried for years. Every moment he spent at that broken piano, every time he pushed through frustration, every time he doubted himself, but kept going, those feelings lived inside the notes he played now, and the room heard it. One of the students near the door shifted position. Another stopped whispering and tilted their heads slightly, as if trying to understand what they were hearing. The faint sounds of judgment that had filled the air earlier began to fade, but even with the room slowly turning in his favor, Evan still felt the pressure. His back was tense, and sweat began to gather at the base of his neck. His hands, though moving smoothly, felt heavy at moments. He worried he might lose control of the rhythm. He worried he might forget the next part of the piece. He worried the director might still think he wasn't good enough. When these thoughts began to crowd his mind, his fingers stumbled. Not a full mistake, just a slight hesitation, a fraction of a second, where the music wasn't as clean as it should have been. It was the kind of thing only sharp listeners would catch, but he felt it immediately. His heart jumped. A wave of panic rose in his chest. He pushed forward, trying to recover, but inside he was terrified that he had ruined the whole performance with that tiny slip. He bit down on the panic, forcing it to quiet. He reminded himself of something his mother told him once. Asterisk. People don't listen for perfection. They listen for heart. Asterisk. That memory steadied him. Just enough. He continued playing, letting the music pull him back into its rhythm. And slowly, the fear loosened its hold on him. His fingers moved with more freedom now, flowing across the keys in a smooth arc dot as he entered the middle section of the piece. A softer, more thoughtful part. Evan allowed himself to breathe. The melody dropped into a gentle, lingering pattern. It felt almost like a conversation he was having with the piano, one where the room simply watched quietly from a distance. He didn't know it, but the atmosphere in the hall had completely shifted. Even Mr. Carver, who had started the audition looking exhausted and uninterested, now sat up straighter. His pen had stopped tapping. His eyes were on Evan, focused and alert. He wasn't just listening, he was absorbing, evaluating, maybe even appreciating. The students near the wall had stopped whispering altogether. One of them had crossed their arms, not in a dismissive way, but the way someone does when they're trying to concentrate on something unexpected. Evan didn't know any of this. His world had narrowed to the piano beneath his hands. The rest of the room had disappeared. By the time he reached the fourth movement of his piece, the part he always thought of as the turning point, his body relaxed even more. This section was his favorite, the moment where the melody rose like someone finding hope after a long struggle. He poured himself into it, feeling every note as if he were shaping something alive. The notes spilled out boldly, confidently. The grand piano responded with rich sound that filled every corner of the room. The change was impossible to ignore now. Anyone who had doubted him at the start no longer carried the same certainty. But just as he settled into the emotion of the piece, something unexpected happened. One of the doors in the hallway closed loudly. The sudden noise echoed through the room like a sharp crack. Evan physically flinched, his shoulders tightening. His fingers nearly slipped again. He paused not in the music, but in his mind. The brief shock made him question himself all over again. Asterisk, stay focused? Stay focused? Asterisk, he begged himself. He slowed for a heartbeat, then gently reconnected with the rhythm. He didn't let the noise steal his momentum. The music dipped slightly, but it didn't break. Instead, he used that moment of disruption to push deeper into the next phrase. And it worked. The tension in his chest eased, replaced by something stronger, a calm determination. The kind he had felt on the nights when he played to comfort himself. The kind he felt when he remembered why he loved music in the first place. He played the closing movement with a kind of courage he didn't even know he had. His fingers moved faster now, dancing over the keys with confidence. Not perfect, not polished in a professional way, but full, real, honest. The sound grew bigger, then softened, then rose again in a sweeping passage that held the room still. Even the lights above seemed quieter, the air thicker with attention. By now, Evan could sense, without looking, that the room had changed completely. The director wasn't waiting for this to end. The students weren't smirking anymore. The staff members weren't shuffling papers. They were listening. Truly listening. As he reached the final measures of his piece, the music shifted into something tender, almost fragile. He let the last notes fall softly, letting them linger in the air like a fading memory. He lifted his fingers slowly from the keys, allowing the silence to settle. For a moment, just one breath, he didn't move. His eyes stayed on the piano, his hands still hovering slightly above it. His heartbeat thudded loud in his ears again. Was it good enough? Did they hear what he tried to express? Did he make a mistake people would point out later? Did he embarrass himself or surprise them? He couldn't tell. The silence stretched longer than he expected. He finally looked up, nervousness returning like a sudden drop in temperature. The director wasn't writing notes anymore. He wasn't flipping pages. He wasn't frowning or nodding. He was simply sitting there, staring at Evan with an expression that wasn't easily readable, some mix of surprise, thoughtfulness, and something else Evan couldn't name. The students near the door had straightened, no longer leaning against the wall. One of them looked genuinely stunned. Another seemed almost embarrassed for having laughed earlier. Evan swallowed hard. His hands fell into his lap, still trembling, but for the first time, the trembling wasn't just fear. It was the aftershock of pouring his entire heart into something. He didn't know what the director would say next. He didn't know if he had impressed anyone, but the room wasn't laughing anymore. When the last note faded into the air, it felt as if the whole room was holding its breath. Evan sat still on the piano bench, unsure of what to do next. His fingers hovered in his lap, still tingling from the intensity of the performance. He had never played that piece with so much emotion before, and the weight of it lingered in his chest like a heartbeat echoing after a long run. For a moment, no one moved. The director didn't speak. The students near the door didn't whisper. Even the staff members who had been writing notes earlier had stopped entirely. The silence felt heavy, but not in a bad way, in a way that meant something important was happening. Evan tried to read their faces, but it was hard. The bright lights above him made it difficult to see the details, and his nerves were still too strong to let him think clearly. His mind raced with questions. Asterisk, did I mess up? Did they hate it? Did they only stay quiet because they didn't know how to respond? Asterisk, he swallowed, his throat dry. All he wanted was a hint, just a small sign that he hadn't embarrassed himself. But no one gave him that sign right away. The stillness felt endless. Finally, the director leaned back in his chair. His expression was not the tired one he had worn earlier. It wasn't bored or frustrated. It was surprised, deeply surprised. And beneath that surprise, there was something else, something like admiration. Though Evan didn't trust himself to believe that yet, the director folded his hands on top of the table and studied Evan for a long moment. Then, in a voice quieter and steadier than Evan expected, he said, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The question hit Evan harder than he expected. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a challenge. It sounded genuine. Curious. Evan cleared his throat. "I taught myself," he said softly. One of the students near the door let out a small gasp. Another whispered something under their breath that Evan couldn't catch. The director raised his eyebrows slightly, not in disbelief, but in amazement. "Self-taught?" he repeated, as if trying to make sure he heard correctly. "Yes, sir," Evan said. "I practiced at home, on an old piano." He didn't know how to explain the broken keys or the missing pedals without sounding strange, so he left it at that. There was another long pause. The director didn't look annoyed or confused. He simply looked thoughtful, as though he were piecing together something important. "Stand up for a moment," the director said. Motioning with a small wave of his hand, Evan obeyed, rising slowly from the bench. His legs felt shaky, and he hoped no one noticed. He stood with his hands at his sides, unsure of what would happen next. The director looked at the staff members on either side of him. They exchanged a glance, one that seemed to say, "Asterisk, did you hear what we heard?" Asterisk. One of them nodded slightly. The director turned back to Evan. "I'd like to hear a little more," he said. Evan blinked, startled. "More?" "Yes," the director replied. "Play something else. Anything you're comfortable with." A rush of nerves hit Evan again. He hadn't expected to play two pieces. He only prepared the one he had written himself. His mind scrambled, flipping through every melody he had practiced over the years. Most of them were incomplete or rough, but one stood out, a simple tune he used to play when he felt overwhelmed. Something soft, something calming. He nodded. "Okay," he whispered. He sat back down at the piano, taking a moment to steady himself. His hands moved to the keys, more confidently this time. He began playing the quiet piece he knew so well, letting the notes fall gently like small raindrops. There was nothing dramatic about this melody, nothing bold or impressive. It wasn't meant to show skill, it was meant to show emotion. And the room listened again. The tune drifted softly through the hall, filling the space with a peaceful, steady rhythm. Evan kept his eyes down, focusing entirely on the sound. He didn't think about the director. He didn't think about the students by the door. He didn't think about the long bus ride home afterward. All he thought about was the music, how it had always been a place of safety for him. A space where he didn't need to be perfect when he finished. The last notes lingered for a moment before dissolving into silence. This time, the director didn't wait long. He stood up from his chair. Evan's heart dropped. Asterisk, was he upset? Did I do something wrong? All the confidence he had gained during the performance vanished instantly. But then the director spoke quietly. "I don't think you understand what you just did." Evan blinked. Unsure of what that meant, the director took a few steps closer, his expression softening. "You played with feeling," he said. "With honesty. Most students who walk through that door have technique, training, years of instruction, but very few have what you just demonstrated." Evan didn't know what to say. His mind was spinning. His heart pounded. The director continued. "This academy isn't looking only for students who can follow instructions. We're looking for those who can bring something real to their music. And you have that." Evan's throat tightened. His eyes flicked toward the students near the door. Their expressions had changed completely. Gone were the smirks and bored looks. Now they seemed wide-eyed, almost stunned. One of them whispered. That was incredible, but tried to say it quietly enough that it wouldn't echo. The director sighed gently, almost as if he didn't want to break the moment. "I want you in our program," he said. "I want to help you grow." Evan froze. He didn't understand at first. "In the program?" He repeated quietly. "Yes," the director said. "Full admission." The air felt too heavy for Evan to breathe. Full admission? That was something he never imagined he would hear. Not today, not this year, maybe not ever. He felt dizzy with disbelief. "But," he said softly, "I don't have formal training. I don't read music as well as others." "I don't." The director lifted a hand to gently stop him. "You have potential," he said. "Real potential. And everything else can be taught." Evan stared at him, trying to absorb the words. His entire world felt like it had shifted slightly, like the ground under him was no longer in the same place. The director walked back to the table and picked up a form. He handed it to Evan. "Take this home," he said. "Bring it back with your signature. We'll handle the rest." Evan took the paper cautiously, as if it might disappear if he touched it too quickly. One of the staff members spoke up gently. "You played beautifully. You should be proud." Evan nodded, though he still felt like he might float out of the room from disbelief. As he gathered his things, he noticed the students near the door, watching him with a very different kind of attention. Not mocking, not dismissive, curious, respectful. One of them stepped forward slightly. "Hey," they said, "that was really good." Evan managed a small smile. "Thank you," he said softly. He walked toward the door, his legs still shaky, but his heart much lighter. When he stepped into the hallway, he took a deep breath. It felt like the first real breath he had taken since he entered the academy that day. The tension in his shoulders eased, and the buzzing nerves in his chest began to settle. He looked down at the form in his hands, the one offering him a place in the academy. He couldn't believe it. He kept reading the words over and over, just to make sure he saw them correctly. As he began walking toward the exit, he passed by the front desk, where the same woman from earlier was organizing papers. She glanced up and offered a polite smile, but when she saw the admission form in his hand, her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "You must have done really well." Evan felt his face warm slightly. "Thank you," he said, tucking the paper carefully into his bag. He stepped outside the academy building, and the fresh air hit him instantly. The sun was lower now, casting a soft golden light across the pavement. It felt like a completely different day from the one he started. He stood there for a moment, just breathing in the air and letting the afternoon light wash over him. He looked around at the street, at people walking by, at cars passing, at the sky beginning to soften into evening colors. Everything seemed the same as before, but inside, everything felt different. He had come to the academy expecting to fail, or at least expecting to be ignored. Instead, he had walked out with something he never thought he would have, a real chance. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to his mother. "I did it. I think they want me there." A few seconds later, she replied, "I knew you could. Come home safe." Evan smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep inside, the kind that didn't fade quickly. He started walking toward the bus stop, the admission form secure in his bag. His steps felt lighter than usual, almost like music was carrying him forward. For the first time in his life, he felt like he truly belonged somewhere. And this was only the beginning. Evan woke up early the next morning, long before the sun had fully risen. His room was quiet, and the soft blue light of dawn pressed gently through the curtains. For a while, he just lay there, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand everything that had happened the day before. It felt unreal, almost like a dream he wasn't ready to fully believe. He turned his head to the side, seeing his worn-out backpack sitting on the chair near his desk. Inside, it was the admission form from the academy. He had checked it so many times already that he could probably recite every line from memory. But even then, he kept feeling the strange urge to pull it out again, just to confirm it was real. After a few minutes of quiet, he finally sat up. His body felt rested, but his mind was still spinning. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed softly. There was excitement in his chest, real excitement, but it was mixed with something else too. Nervousness, fear. What if they changed their mind? What if he couldn't keep up once he got there? What if everything fell apart? He took a deep breath, reminding himself that the director had seen something in him, something worth teaching. That alone kept him from spiraling too far into doubt. He got dressed slowly, pulling on a simple shirt and jeans, and made his way to the kitchen, where the smell of warm toast filled the air. His mother stood at the counter, preparing breakfast with her usual calm presence. She always moved quietly in the mornings, almost like she didn't want to disturb the world before it was fully awake. "Morning," she said without turning around. though he could hear the smile in her voice. "Morning," Evan replied. She placed a plate in front of him, then leaned against the counter with her arms crossed. "Did you sleep well?" "Kind of," he said with a small shrug. "I kept thinking about the audition." She smiled gently. "I figured." Evan picked up his toast and took a small bite. It tasted good, warm and familiar, but his stomach still fluttered with nerves. His mother watched him for a moment, her eyes soft but observant. "You know," she said quietly, "you worked so hard for this. You should let yourself be proud." He looked down at the table. It feels unreal." "That's because it's new," she replied. "But new doesn't mean impossible." He swallowed a little too tightly, then nodded. After breakfast, he pulled the form out of his bag and set it on the table. His mother sat beside him, reading through the pages carefully. She didn't rush. She took her time with each line, as if making sure she understood everything before moving on. When she reached the last page, she looked at him with a warm, proud expression. "Are you ready to sign it?" Evan nodded slowly. "Yes." His mother handed him a pen, and he felt a strange tremble in his hand as he held it. Signing a paper shouldn't feel like such a big thing, but this paper wasn't like any other. This one could change his life. He pressed the pen down and signed his name carefully. When he finished, he let out a long breath, unsure of whether it had been trapped in his chest for hours or days. "There," his mother said softly. "It's official." He stared at his signature. Something inside him loosened, like tension melting away. But at the same time, another feeling stepped in, one he recognized as responsibility. A good kind of responsibility, but heavy all the same. His mother folded the papers and placed them neatly back in the envelope. "You should drop this off today," she said. "The sooner, the better." Evan nodded. "I will." He got ready to head out, grabbing his bag and slipping on his shoes. Before he opened the door, his mother called out softly, "Evan?" He turned. "I'm proud of you," she said. "No matter what happens next." A warm feeling spread through his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. He stepped outside and began the long walk toward the bus stop. The morning air felt cool and fresh against his skin, and the faint light of sunrise painted the sky in soft gold and pink. Everything looked calm, but inside, his mind was filled with restless thoughts. He kept replaying the director's words in his head. "You have potential." Every time he remembered them, something inside him lit up, small but steady, like a flame that refused to go out. When he reached the bus stop, he sat down on the bench and glanced around. A few people stood nearby, scrolling through their phones or listening to music. None of them seemed aware of the envelope he held tightly in his hand, but to Evan, it felt like he was carrying something priceless. The bus arrived, and he took a seat near the window. As the city rolled past outside, his thoughts drifted. He imagined what the academy would be like on a real school day. Students practicing in different rooms, teachers offering advice, music echoing through the hallways. The idea filled him with both excitement and fear. When he finally stepped off the bus near the academy, he took a deep breath. The building looked the same as the day before, tall, polished, intimidating, but today he felt slightly more prepared to face it. He walked through the glass doors and approached the front desk. The same woman from yesterday greeted him with a warm smile. "Back again?" she asked. He nodded. "I came to drop off my form." Her smile widened. "Wonderful. Let me take it to the office for processing." He handed it to her carefully, watching as she placed it in a tray filled with files. Seeing it disappear into the stack gave him a strange mix of relief and anxiety. It was out of his hands now, literally and figuratively. "Someone will contact you soon with your schedule," she said. "You've made a good choice coming here." He thanked her quietly and stepped back into the hallway. As he walked toward the exit, he heard a piano from somewhere down the corridor. The notes floated softly through the air, smooth and practiced. He paused, listening. Whoever was playing had a confidence he admired. The sound pulled at something inside him, something that wanted to grow, learn, and become better. He almost turned toward the sound, drawn by curiosity, but he stopped himself. It wasn't his time yet. Soon, though. Very soon. Outside, the sun had risen fully. People walked briskly across the campus, carrying books, instruments, and bags. They all looked like they belonged there. Evan wondered if he would ever feel the same as he walked back to the bus stop. He noticed a gentle excitement growing inside him again. It was different from the fear. It felt like possibility. When he reached home, his mother was waiting in the living room, sitting with a small cup of tea. She looked up the moment he walked in. "Did everything go well?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, they said they'd contact me soon." "That's good," she said softly, taking a sip. "While we wait, you should keep practicing." He smiled a little. "I was planning to." He went to his room, sat at his old piano, and placed his fingers on the keys. The familiar rough texture greeted him, worn from years of use. The piano wasn't perfect, far from it, but it had always been his safe place. He began to play a few slow notes, warming up his hands. Then he shifted into the piece he had played during the audition. This time, it felt different. It felt lighter, smoother, almost like he had opened a new door inside himself. He played for over an hour without realizing it. Each note echoed through his small room, and with every chord, his anxiety eased a little more. When he finally stopped, he leaned back on the bench and closed his eyes for a moment. He could imagine himself at the academy already, sitting in a classroom, learning new techniques, meeting other students, maybe even performing again. The thought brought a small, hopeful smile to his face. Over the next few days, Evan settled into a quiet routine. He practiced every morning and every evening, losing himself in the music. His mother supported him in every way she could, making sure he ate well, reminding him to rest, and listening during the moments when nerves tried to overwhelm him. Then, one afternoon, his phone buzzed. A notification appeared from the academy. His heart jumped. He opened the message with shaky hands. Asterisk, your admission has been approved. Orientation will be held next week. Please arrive prepared to meet your instructors and classmates. Asterisk. Evan stared at the message for a long moment. Unable to move. Orientation. Next week. This was real. He let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Then he stood up and went to find his mother. She was folding laundry in the hallway. "They accepted me," he said softly. She looked at him, eyes widening. "They did?" He nodded. "Orientation is next week." His mother set aside the shirt she was holding and pulled him into a warm hug. "I'm so happy for you," she whispered. Evan closed his eyes, letting the moment settle deeply into his heart. All the years of self-doubt, all the nights spent practicing alone, all the moments when he felt like he didn't belong anywhere, they all led to this. When she stepped back, she smiled at him with tears in her eyes. "This is your chance," she said. "Make the most of it." Evan nodded. "I will." That night, he went to bed with a feeling he had never known so strongly before, a feeling that tomorrow held something new, something bright, something worth all the effort he had ever given. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was chasing a distant dream. He felt like he was stepping into it. Evan hardly slept the night before orientation. He kept waking up every hour, checking the time, then forcing himself to close his eyes again. But no matter how hard he tried to rest, the excitement in his chest refused to settle. By the time morning finally came, his mind was already buzzing with anticipation. His alarm rang at 6, but he was already sitting up, staring at the soft light creeping into his room. His clothes were laid out neatly on the chair. He had set them there the night before, checking everything twice to make sure it looked decent enough for his first day. He got dressed slowly, trying to keep his hands steady. His mother had made breakfast, but he could barely eat more than a few bites. His stomach felt too tight, almost like someone had tied a small knot inside it. "You'll be fine," his mother said gently as she packed him a small lunch. "Just be yourself." Evan nodded, though he wasn't sure he knew exactly who he was in a place like the academy. Still, he gave her a brave smile, hugged her tightly, and headed out the door. The walk to the bus stop felt different this time. The air seemed fresher, the sounds around him sharper. He kept imagining what the orientation would be like, crowds of students, teachers he had never met, rooms filled with instruments more expensive than anything he had ever touched. When the bus came, he stepped on and found a seat near the window. With every stop the bus made, he grew more aware of the envelope in his bag, this time filled with schedules, information sheets, and the orientation pass the academy had sent. When he finally stood in front of the academy building again, the sight still made his stomach flip. The tall glass windows reflected the bright morning light, and students hurried in and out, carrying instruments in sleek cases. Some looked confident. Some looked tired. Some looked excited, just like him. Taking a deep breath, Evan pushed through the doors. Inside, the lobby was livelier than he had ever seen it. Staff members stood behind tables organizing orientation materials. Students held folders and maps while glancing around the building with curious, eager eyes. Evan approached one of the tables slowly. A staff member looked up and smiled. "Orientation pass?" she asked. He handed it over. "Welcome," she said warmly, giving him a folder with his name on it. "You'll find your schedule, map, and class assignments inside. Your group is meeting in room 204 in about 15 minutes." Evan thanked her and stepped aside, opening the folder. His heart thumped as he read through the information. Piano Level 1 instructor, L. Hart, ear training. Music theory. Performance workshop. There it was. His new life in printed ink. He followed the map through the hallways, which were filled with the sounds of soft chatter and the occasional burst of laughter. Some doors were open, showing glimpses of practice rooms, pianos of every kind, students warming up, teachers greeting newcomers. Room 204 had a sign taped to the door that read, "Orientation Group C inside." About 20 students sat in chairs arranged in a semicircle. Most of them were close in age to Evan, though a few looked slightly older. Evan chose a seat near the middle, not too hidden, not too exposed. A few students glanced at him politely. He nodded back, unsure of what else to do. A moment later, a tall instructor with calm eyes entered the room. She carried a clipboard and a gentle smile. "Good morning, everyone," she said. "I'm here to walk you through what to expect this year. For those of you focusing on piano, I'll be one of your instructors." Evan straightened in his chair. The instructor introduced herself as Ms. Hart and began explaining the academy's system, practice hours, performances, classroom expectations, and support available to students. She had a way of speaking that calmed Evan's nerves. She didn't sound strict or intimidating. She sounded encouraging, like she genuinely wanted everyone to succeed. At one point, she looked around the room and said, "Some of you may feel nervous or unsure right now. That's normal. You are here because you showed potential. Our job is to help you shape it." Those words settled somewhere deep inside Evan's chest. After the orientation session, the group was taken on a building tour. Evan followed along quietly, absorbing everything. The concert hall was larger than he expected, with velvet seats and a stage that looked polished enough to reflect the lights. He imagined himself performing there one day and felt a strange mix of fear and longing. The practice rooms were small but cozy, each holding a piano that looked almost untouched. Evan felt a spark of excitement at the thought of having a proper instrument to practice on. When the tour ended, students were given free time to explore or meet their instructors. Evan walked around carefully, wanting to see as much as he could without getting lost. When he reached the piano wing again, he peeked into a few practice rooms. Some students were already playing. He listened quietly from the hallway, fast, confident fingers dancing across the keys. Their skill intimidated him, but it also inspired him. Eventually, he gathered the courage to sit in an empty practice room. He closed the door gently behind him and set his bag on the floor. For a long moment, he just looked at the piano in front of him. It was beautiful smooth keys, polished wood, everything perfectly maintained. He touched one of the keys lightly, and the soft sound echoed through the room. He sat down, placed his hands on the keys, and began to play a simple melody. The sound was clearer than anything he ever produced at home. Each note rang as if it had been waiting to be played. Someone knocked gently on the door. Evan stopped playing and turned. Miss Hart stood there with a soft smile. "May I come in?" He nodded quickly. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I heard someone playing and thought I'd check in." Evan swallowed nervously. "Sorry, I was just practicing." "No need to apologize," she said. "That's what these rooms are for." She walked closer to the piano. "Would you mind playing a little more for me?" He hesitated, but then nodded. He started playing the piece he had used for the audition, not the intense part, just the opening section. When he finished, Miss Hart watched him with thoughtful eyes. "You have a natural way of expressing emotion through your playing," she said. "Your technique needs work, but that's expected. What you have can't be taught easily." Evan felt his face warm slightly. "Thank you." She sat on the bench beside him. "You'll be in my class this year. I want you to work hard, but I also want you to trust your instincts. They're strong." He nodded again, feeling something steadying inside him. Miss Hart stood and said, "Before I go, remember this. Practice is important, but passion is what carries you. And you have plenty of that." When she left, Evan stared at the piano again, letting her words sink in. He played for another hour, slowly at first, then more confidently as he allowed himself to relax. Over the next few days, classes officially began. Evan quickly learned that the academy was challenging, far more than he expected. Music theory confused him at times, ear training pushed his limits, and the pace of the lessons was fast. But he didn't let the difficulty discourage him. Every morning he arrived early to practice. Every afternoon he stayed late. And gradually he started to see improvement. His classmates began to notice too. Some of them started talking to him between lessons. They asked about his background, surprised to learn he was self-taught. A few even asked him to practice together. For the first time, Evan felt like he was part of something, a community of people who loved music as much as he did. Weeks passed. Then months. Soon, the academy announced its first student showcase of the year. Every student had to perform a small piece. Evan's nerves shot up the moment he heard the news. Performing in front of the director again. In front of teachers. In front of students who practiced professionally for years. It scared him, but Ms. Hart encouraged him. "Choose a piece that feels like you," she said. "Something honest." Evan thought for days. Finally, he decided on a simple piece, one he had created himself, filled with soft rises and gentle pauses. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. But it was true to him. When the day of the showcase arrived, the concert hall buzzed with energy. Students whispered nervously backstage, while teachers offered last-minute advice. Evan stood behind the curtain, clutching his hands together. His heart pounded, but unlike before, it didn't feel like fear was pushing him down. It felt like anticipation lifting him forward. When his name was called, he stepped out onto the stage. The lights were bright. The hall was full. But he walked to the piano slowly, calmly, like he belonged there. He sat down, breathed deeply, and placed his hands on the keys. The first notes were quiet but confident. As he played, everything else disappeared. There was no audience, no pressure, no doubt, just music. Pure, simple, honest music. When he hit the last note, the hall fell silent for a heartbeat. Then applause filled the room. Evan looked up, startled, but then he saw Miss Hart smiling proudly. A few classmates clapped even louder. And in the back of the hall, the director nodded once, a look of recognition crossing his face. The applause washed over Evan, warm and overwhelming, as he stood and bowed. Something inside him lifted a feeling he had never known. This deeply belonging, not because he was perfect, not because he had training, but because he had grown. When the showcase ended, students gathered around him, offering compliments. Some said his piece was beautiful. Others said it felt real, genuine. Evan smiled awkwardly, grateful but still stunned. Later that night, when he returned home, his mother waited in the living room. She looked up the moment he walked in. "How did it go?" she asked. Evan set down his bag, took a breath, and smiled. "It felt right," he said softly. I think I'm meant to be there." His mother's eyes warmed with pride. "I always knew you were." Evan sat at his old piano before bed, touching the familiar keys. He played the same gentle melody he had played years ago, the one that had always comforted him. But this time, it sounded different, not because the piano had changed, because he had. As the notes rose softly through the room, Evan felt something settle into place, a quiet certainty. This journey was only beginning, and he was ready for whatever came next.